everyone. Today, I'm going to run you through how to run a successful migration project. I'm Rob Keefus, and I am a Principal Program Manager in the Global Customer Success Organization. What does that mean? That means I lead a team of program managers that work with our customers and identify proven architectures and patterns in the customer environment, and then provide automation, tools, and guidance out to the whole world and Microsoft to use with our customer engagements. This is a super exciting topic for me. Migration is something that I've been working on and my team has been working on for multiple years. I have a lot of really interesting things to share with all of you as we go through this. So our agenda today is we're going to go through a little bit about why we need to take a step towards migration. We're going to talk about our best practices, and I've identified quite a few of them to take you through. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how Microsoft can help you as you work through your migration challenges in your migration projects. So, as we are all aware, AI is a very hot topic, and everybody is super excited to build and get to AI. We have a lot of exciting things that are going on with agents that folks are wanting to get involved with and build for their businesses today. Like many other innovations that have come and gone over the years, in order to get to something as important as AI and building AI agents, we first need to think about what will get us there the fastest. And one thing we've done is we've talked to many customers, and we actually did a Forrester information gathering exercise. And this is what we learned. And don't just take it from me. Take it from what we learned actually from our customers themselves. 75% of the customers that we talked to said they moved faster once they have already migrated to Azure when it came to adopting their first AI project or iterating on existing investments that they have already made in AI. What we have seen is that your ability to move agile when adopting new AI technologies is 3 times higher than when you went ahead and tried to do it before you migrated some of your data and infrastructure into Azure. So it's really important if you are like, hey, I really want to look at what I can do and how I can use AI to really enhance my business and really, bring some of the value from AI to everyday work that folks are doing in my organization. First, making sure that you've migrated is really important. Now, there are many best practices when it comes to migrating to Azure. And I would love to spend time with you and walk you through all the different ones that we've got identified. We've got lots of different areas and categories where we could go ahead and migrate you and different tips and tricks. I've identified 7 best practice topics to go through today with you. Some of these are things that are not new. For you, it may be new, but for others that are attending and listening to this presentation, you may find that there are a few new things that you weren't aware of that I've put in here for you that we may not have talked to you about in the past. So with that said, let me jump in and I'm going to take you through some of the best practices that I think will be really important for you as you look to migrate to Azure. And this is really to give you the best experience possible. What we've done is we have organized these best practices according to, kind of different areas. So to help you understand, one of them is around readiness and foundation. I'll take you through that first. Then we're going to talk about some of the best practices for design and govern. And then once we've done design and govern, we really got to think about manage and ongoing optimize. So I will take you through all of these. Hopefully you've gleaned some really valuable information, and this will be useful for you as you think about your own migration projects. All right. So our first best practice tip that we're going to talk about under readiness and foundation is going to be around discovering assessment in your migration strategy. Now, this is not a new tip, but it is absolutely essential and important for your success on migrating into Azure. First thing you need to think about is you have to understand what you have existing that you're looking to migrate. You have to do a very thorough discovery process. You have to identify and understand everything that you have in your environment that you're looking to migrate. So you got to know what you have, and then you've got to assess it to see where does it fit. Now, when I say assess it and where does it fit, what do I mean by that? What we like to do, and I'm going to show you kind of a little example here that we did, in fact, at Microsoft IT, just to give you, a good idea of what I mean by this, is we think about it like from a rationalizing your portfolio. So you first discovered everything that you've got that you're looking to migrate. Okay, so you've got it, you know what it is, but now you have to make some decisions on it. And you have to see what makes sense. Is it something that you should be, retiring or eliminating is the best way I would say it. Meaning that, hey, it doesn't make a lot of sense to move this up into Azure, and it's very expensive for us to keep it on-prem. So maybe this is something we should just move away from. Another thing you think about is you look at some of the workloads that you have on-prem does it make more sense to just go to a SaaS-based service, like a third-party solution? Is this something that you really want to move and still maintain and curate within the cloud? A really easy example would be like a CRM system, right? Your messaging system, certain data warehouses, databases, things like that. Are these things that you could just go ahead and use services for instead of having to maintain all that infrastructure up into the cloud? The other thing you want to think about is, are there some opportunities here to modernize? You may have some architectures that are quite old, maybe like a very traditional 3-tier architecture. And you're like, hey, I could, use Azure PaaS services and re-architect that workload as I move it into Azure. And that will make it easier and less expensive for me to maintain once I've moved it off on-prem. And the last thing you're going to realize when you rationalize what you have today is some of these things may just want to remain on-prem, right? You may say it doesn't make sense. There's latency. Maybe there's a security requirement that just prevents you from moving it. You've identified it. You put it in that bucket, and then you move on. Now, this probably sounds like a lot, and it probably sounds a bit overwhelming, but Microsoft does provide you a tool called Azure Migrate. It's a free tool, right? It's not only going to help you discover and assess, but it will actually do the migrations for you and help you modernize some of the, applications that you have on-prem that you put into that, bucket. So this tool is free for you today. You could go ahead and use it. A lot of our customers have been very successful with it. And I would really advise you to take a look at it. I do have links at the end of the presentation with all the resources that I'm going to share with you through each of the tips. So you don't have to worry about going and searching online right now for it. Just wait to the end. I've got links for you for all of these things. And let's jump on to our next tip. So once we've gone ahead, we have done our discovery, rationalized our estate, okay? The next thing I need you to think about before you actually move it into actually doing any of the lifting of moving things into Azure is think about planning for security. This is quite possibly the largest delayed thing we see on a migration project. So there's really 3 things you have to think about. You have to do a risk assessment for security. So as you look at the workload that you want to move, you want to make sure that you're planning for security. You're identifying any potential vulnerabilities or threats. You want to think about what are your compliance requirements. And, you may have industry standards, regulations that you need to be aware of. You probably are aware of them today on your on-premise environment in your data centers, but you also have to think about how is that going to translate into the cloud? What's going to be different there? And the last thing is you got to put your security controls in place, right? Once you've done all of this, you have to make sure that you put the guardrails in place, that you are auditing to make sure that you are staying within compliance. Now, as I said, this is usually the thing that causes the largest delay. What I have actually seen in the real world is companies, they will create migration projects. They'll do the discovery. They'll do the assessment. They'll plan everything. They'll work with their application owners. They get ready to do the actual migration itself. Or sometimes they've actually done the migration. They've gotten all the way over to actually cutting over. And then they realize that they haven't talked to the security team and they haven't gone through planning for security, and they get delayed by months. So I don't want you to have that problem. I want you to be successful. And my advice would be to bring security with you on day one and think about these things right as you get started out of the gates on your migration project. Now, Microsoft does provide the cloud security benchmark, okay? And the purpose of this is to help you establish what your secure foundation is for your migration projects so you can safely migrate your data and your systems. Now, the cloud security benchmark, one of the things that it does is it actually will help you to understand, where you are once you've moved something over as far as from compliance, and it provides some governance and safeguards for you as well. Now, Microsoft takes a look and built out this. We really take three things. First off, we're going to publish the benchmark. So all these benchmarks are published. Then we standardize them with the cloud security benchmark. And the last thing we do is we automate them in Microsoft Defender for Cloud. This part is all free to you. This doesn't cost you anything to use these features within Defender for Cloud. And I highly encourage you to take a look at these, as this will help you to understand your security posture and see where you need to make adjustments in your workloads, certainly before you actually cut over to production on any migration project. One of the things I will tell you is that because we've standardized these in the cloud security benchmark, it should make it fairly easy for you to map your controls over to the benchmark, okay? And if you have any custom controls, you'll have to go through that benchmark to see which ones best align, right, to your custom controls. We have this all available for you. You could actually run reports, you can export reports, and you can, of course, review these with your security team. These should all really help to accelerate you and make you successful on your migration project. Moving on to tip number 3. So tip number 3 is all about making sure that you've established a robust, solid foundation before you migrate your workloads into Azure. What does that mean? So a foundation is all the plumbing that you need. You can think of it like if you were to build like a city, you want to make sure that you have all the city streets planned, the electrical planned, right? The sewers planned, right? The water systems planned. All that plumbing you would want to have done and figured out before you built your first building or your first house, right? And you could think of that with Azure Landing Zones. Azure Landing Zone helps you set up all the foundational services you need for your organization. And then you can start to think about moving your first workloads into Azure. So what do I mean by that? I would mean it would help set up all of your network, right? Your network connectivity, both native in Azure, and if you need to connect back into your on-prem environment. It will help you to set up all your baseline monitoring, right? Collecting all your logs, getting basic alerts put in place for your environment. It will help you with your identity. Get your identity set up so that you have the right RBAC, which is your role-based access control, so that you make sure folks only have access to what they should have access, and you don't, provide more privileges than is absolutely necessary for each of your teams working in Azure. All of this foundational guidance is built in the Cloud Adoption Framework, and it is called Azure Landing Zones. And it comes with 3 accelerators for deployment. We have an Azure portal-based experience, and I'm going to get to that in just a second. But we also have infrastructure as code examples for how to go about doing this. And we have accelerators. And accelerators could be like, hey, I would like to deploy SAP. I would like to deploy AVS, Azure VMware Services. Those type of accelerators are also available to you. So it will help you just to accelerate getting these things built, and you follow all the Microsoft best practices. Like I just talked about security above, we actually make sure the security is there for you as well, as far as making sure that we put like the security controls in place that are most commonly used. So this is our reference architecture for Azure Landing Zone. If you were to deploy Azure Landing Zone, we would stamp this environment out in your Azure tenant, and you would have all of these things already for you and available, so you can actually move your first workload or migrate your first workload into Azure with a lot of confidence that you've done all the right things to be successful long-term in Azure. Now, as you migrate more workloads into Azure, this is designed to be a scalable architecture, meaning it will grow with you. Another thing to tell you is that as Azure matures and as new best practices and new services come available in Azure, we update the Azure landing zone and we provide you with that information so you can update your stamp of Azure landing zone as well. I've got a link here for you, but it's also in one of my slides towards the end where it will tell you, how to get started with Azure Landing Zone. But, the best way to go about doing this is to actually show you how to deploy Azure Landing Zone. So there's a portal-based implementation of Azure Landing Zone, and I've prepared a demo for you that I'm going to run you through right now. So let's jump in and take a look at what Azure Landing Zone looks like. So first off, on the previous slide, right, I showed you a short link to Azure Landing Zone. So I navigated over to our landing page here for Azure Landing Zone, which is going to show the conceptual architecture that I showed on that previous slide, as well as it's going to have a really good breakdown of our design areas, design principles. And if you scroll down a little bit as you kind of review the documentation, what you're going to find is an accelerator. All right, so you're going to see this deploy to Azure accelerator here. And I'm actually going to walk you through the portal-based accelerator, but there is a Bicep and Terraform deployments with accelerators available for you as well. And there's a hyperlink for that on this page as well. So when you click on deploy to Azure, what it's going to do is going to take you to the Azure portal. You're going to log into the Azure portal, and it's going to provide you almost like a template, or you could think of it as kind of like a wizard that is going to step by step take you through all the various design decisions that you need to make to deploy Azure Landing Zone. Now, one of the first things I can tell you is that when you go ahead and do the walk yourself through the deployment is you have to pick where is this going to deploy from? Like what region am I going to have this deploy from? So for example here, I'm going to go ahead and pick East US 2. So my deployment's going to run from that region. And then I'm going to go through and make all the decisions. So first off, it is going to ask you, it's mandatory, to give it a resource prefix. This is just a way for you to identify the resources that are deployed through this template so you can easily find them, so you know where they're from. And it will help you organize your resources as we go. So I'll show you what it looks like at the end. So for here, I put AE demo for Azure Essentials demo. All right. Now, throughout this template, you're going to see lots and lots of decisions that need to be made. I, of course, am going to try to choose the recommended options, right? We've done all our due diligence. We're trying to make you successful with your migration projects, right? So a lot of the recommendations here follow Microsoft best practices. And so you'll see that I'm going to have follow a lot of these recommendations. For example, deploy in a secondary region. It's absolutely recommended that you set up 2 regions so you have, resiliency in a lot of your workloads. Resiliency not only in zones, but also in multiple regions. So I'm going to go ahead and select next. This is our platform management, security, and governance section. Again, I'm going to leave most of the options here by default as the recommended defaults. I'm going to leave this as 30 days. It's a demo. I don't need a lot of retention. I've got my management subscription set up here, and I've got an email address set up for Defender here. So I'm going to go ahead and click next. Here's our baseline alert and monitoring. I'm actually going to cover this in a tip further down the road, but I just want to make sure I've ensured that I've set up some default baseline measurement for alerting. I want to, at a minimum, know what's going on with the resources I've deployed in Azure Landing Zone. So I'm going to leave that on. I'm going to follow the recommendations here, and I'm going to click next. So for network topology and connectivity, I've got a bunch of different options here. I could set it up myself and say no. A lot of times it's very common for folks that are working with their networking teams and their local organizations that they want to deploy that separately. For this, I'm going to choose the first option, which is going to be the hub and spoke network with Azure Firewall. But there is an option to deploy hub and spoke network as well using an MVA, a third party, right? And I can do virtual WAN as well. So I want the Microsoft managed network to be deployed, so I can select that as well. So I'm going to make sure I have my connectivity subscription selected here. I've got the IP address ranges in here. You're going to see a little further down, I've got my second region, West US 2 set up with a different IP address range, which is great. That means I'm going to have 2 regions set up on the moment I deploy. I'm going to have that already figured out. And I'm going to go ahead and move through the wizard here. Okay. On the identity subscription, of course, I want to make sure that I've got all the right identity policies set up. I've selected the subscription I'm going to be using where I'm going to store all my identity information. I've got my second region set up as well for identity. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next. Landing zone configuration. So before was all the platform stuff. Think of that as like the plumbing for Azure Landing Zone. Now I want to think about my landing zone itself. All right. So I've got some policies that will be enforced on the landing zones themselves. I'm going to leave all the recommendations in place. Please review and go through these. Make sure you select things that make sense for your organization. I'm going to say, all right, for my corp landing zone, this is the landing zones that will be, connected to on-prem. So I want to make sure that I've, separated resources and deployments and applications that are Azure native from things that need to have on-prem connectivity. So first off here, you see my corp landing zone. I've selected landing zone P1. Okay, I've set that subscription up ahead of time. And then for my online management group, I've selected another one here. And that's where I'm going to have more like my Azure native. Now, we recommend you democratize your landing zones. So what that means is you should have a subscription for each major workload that you're going to run in your organization. And there's no limit to the number of subscriptions you can have that report up into this kind of hierarchy that we've set up. So for example, if I had 3 or 4 different major mission critical workloads that were going to need to be connected on-prem that needs to be in my my corp landing zone, I could select them all right now, or as I go, I can keep moving them into those management groups. All right, let me go to next here. We're getting close to the end here. We have some workload specific compliance. Have a look here and go through. There are tooltips you'll notice when I highlight here with links on these so you can see what these are about. I don't have any specific workload compliance needs right now, so I'm just going to move through the wizard and hit next. We do want to know how you want decommission and sandbox management groups to function. Basically, do you want us to enforce the recommended policies and controls even in decommissioned and sandbox environments? I'm going to leave this as yes, so when I test things, I know that in my sandbox environment, what I'm going to see is actually how it will behave in my production environments. So for me, I like to leave these, and it is the recommended choice to leave these checked as yes. All right. Last is regulatory compliance. I can layer on additional regulatory policies. So for example, in my corp management group, I want to add the CIS Microsoft Azure Foundation benchmarks. And I believe I have version 2.0 selected there. So once and I can add more, by the way. What you see here, I can go, up here. I can pick another one. Say I've got, I don't know, my online, and I want for my online, it's going to have, I don't know, I could say I'm going to have some PCI, maybe some credit card, transactions in there. So I can scroll down and find PCI, select that, and then hit next. Now, it's going to validate my templates, and then it's going to deploy. This is going to take somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. And when it's all done, you're going to have your default stamp of Azure Landing Zone set up in the tenant in which you deployed to. So if I go here, I'm going to show you what mine looks like. I deployed it a couple days ago before I recorded this demo. All right. So what you're going to see here is first, I'm going to go to management groups just to show you the hierarchy so you can see what's deployed. There is that prefix, remember, so I can easily identify what I deployed. Here you can see I've deployed one landing zone under corp, and I did one under online as well for my native applications. I also have under platform, I've set up my connectivity subscription, my identity subscription, and my management. So if I quickly go into connectivity, just to show you what that looks like, let's go to resource groups. Under resource groups, you'll see I have a lot of new resource groups that we put in there to help you organize the resource. We've got the prefix there ahead of time. And if I go to US East 2, you're going to see here's the network setup. You can see the virtual networks up, the route table set up, the Azure firewall with the firewall policies there as well. If I go back and just show you what management looks like, I will again go to resource group. You will see that what we've done for you here is we set up log analytics. We've put some data collection rules in there for some of the insights that you're going to be looking for. And again, you will find automation account as well. So all that's been set up for you as a part of the choices that you selected in the template ahead of time. The last thing I want to show you, here's one of the landing zones, all right? And in one of the landing zones, if I go to just to show you what the network looks like, here's the VNet. There it is set up, all right? We've got a VNet set up, and you can see that we've wired that and connected that for you, so you're all set and ready to go. We're trying to get this to a point where it puts you on the right foundation for a successful migration project. So I'm hoping that after going through this and trying this out, that you find a lot of success with this tip. All right, let's go and move on to our next thing. You can see that the portal-based experience takes you through a very, very robust set of selections and options. And as you saw at the end, I showed you that you can go ahead and view what was deployed, and it really does help to provide you with that base foundation to be successful in Azure. Not every customer though wants to use a portal-based experience, right? A lot of customers are very interested in using infrastructure as code, working with their templates, right? Setting up DevOps pipelines, right? Building, test cases in there, test passes for their pipelines, and just really deploying through infrastructure as code. Now, what we've done for you as a best practice is we've included in here how to migrate leveraging infrastructure as code. So we originally started with building Azure Landing Zone for you as one way. And we do have templates and accelerators, as I mentioned before, but also there are the customers that prefer to build their own infrastructure as code, and they don't want to use the one that was provided directly from Microsoft. We still want to help you and make sure you're following the best practices, and we want to accelerate you when you go ahead and build your workloads in Azure. So what I'd like to introduce, and this is one of the newer tips that you may not have seen before, is Microsoft has invested a lot of time into building for you something we're calling Azure Verified Modules. I have the link up there, but again, I've included it later in the slide for you. And this is a community-driven initiative, right, that helps to curate a set of standard infrastructure as code modules. We've built the modules in both Bicep and Terraform because we fully recognize as a customer, you could be using one or the other. You may have skills in both. You may have a preference, that for your team that you prefer one, language versus the other. So we've built it out in both languages. And what you can think of this is building blocks, right, for assembling your workloads in Azure. So there's one way to do it where you can use Azure Migrate, which will actually automate the creation of your workload into Azure and synchronize it over, okay? And you could think of this as a different approach. In this approach, where we've seen a lot of customers have a lot of success with, is they want to stamp out their environment and then have the application teams come in once the infrastructure is stamped out in Azure and then restore their applications and restore their data and then cut over to go live. This is also a very widely used approach when people migrate to Azure. They may, like I said, do a synchronization tool like Azure Migrate, or they may prefer to stamp out a lot of environments, have the app teams just restore and then cut over. Both models work. But what we have learned, if you do want to go through the approach of stamping out the infrastructure, you're going to be repeating the same thing over and over and over again. And you may find different people wrote their code slightly different when they went to do this. So we've created verified modules to help you standardize a set of services. So if you were to think about this as Lego blocks that, you can basically build your workload using the individual modules. Each module we have aligned to the well-architected framework to follow not only our reliability best practices to make sure that when you deploy a service using Azure Verified Modules, that it's going to be resilient on day one, but also security best practices too, so that you could trust that when you leverage the infrastructure as code Azure Verified Modules, that you have secure and reliable workloads on day one. In fact, we even put in this, we have regular test passes in this. And if you were to use Azure Verify module and you wanted to change one of our default options that would maybe make the module less secure or maybe make the module less resilient, it would actually start failing that test in your environment. And you would see, oh man, I made a change that maybe I shouldn't have made. And then you can, of course, revert that change back. So Azure Verified Module is something that we're very, very interested in hearing back from all of our customers on. And we really think this is going to be a great tip. We've seen a lot of success with this out there. We have a lot of usage of this, and we continue to invest and build on this for you. Best practice tip number 5. This is not a new tip, but this is a very, very important one to go through. Organizational alignment and governance. And there's two things to think about here first. First, around organizational alignment. This is around making sure that your organization not only has followed our best practices for being successful in Azure and specifically on a migration project by following Azure Landing Zone, but that you're also organizationally aligned to this change. We have a lot of guidance in the Cloud Adoption Framework for how to build a cloud center of excellence. And this is something that I feel for successful customers that have done many migration projects and are running very well in Azure, they have standardized on a cloud center of excellence. What does that mean? They have a group, and a lot of times when you build a center of excellence, it just starts as a V team. And it eventually evolves into like a full control committee in the customer environment as a part of their, day-to-day IT management. So your center of excellence is going to help you with your change management, right? It's going to standardize your architectures, like what I showed you earlier with verified modules. A lot of center of excellence before verified modules existed, they standardized in a library of templates. Governance is very important. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. Cost management and optimization, making sure that everyone is being cost effective and optimizing so the spend isn't getting, out of hand, in your Azure environment. The modern term that we've all standardized, this is called FinOps and FinOps best practices. So of course you're sharing your technical expertise and solution guidance in your center of excellence, knowledge sharing, when we run into this issue or how do I get access, all that is being curated by the center of excellence and then spread out to each of the business units. And then last, of course, standardizing your security and service management for what you're deploying in Azure, right? Making sure your security policies are in place, making sure that you're managing the services, like you're backing up the services, you're monitoring the services, you're doing disaster recovery for the services, right? All that has been standardized as well. This is all controlled by the center of excellence. And again, in the beginning, it's a V team where you have you have somebody from your networking team that joins it, maybe somebody from your procurement team that joins it. You have someone from your ops team that joins as a V team. And you all start to say, hey, what are the most important things that we start to need to tackle in the cloud? And you start to build out, kind of like your guidance that you start to share them with the business units that are, moving at their own speed, following a cloud operating model like Azure Landing Zone puts for them. So one of the most important parts and what really makes the Cloud Center of Excellence come together is, of course, to do governance, right? The governance methodology. This is part of the Cloud Adoption Framework. And this is probably one of the most important parts of the Cloud Adoption Framework, to be honest with you. In fact, if you started with Azure Landing Zone, we put a lot of policy in place for you to help you define your corporate policy. We put a lot of the defaults in there that we have learned, proven with real customers, that this is going to be most likely what you're going to need to get started in Azure. But there's going to be other policies that you're going to need to put in place. You're going to have different regulations, right? Different industries, and you're going to need to put those policies in place too. You could think of policy and governance as the guardrails, right? So in the, like maybe in the traditional IT days on-prem, a lot of times your application teams would need to make requests into your IT department. Your IT department would have to do things for them. And then they'd tell them, okay, it's ready to go. And then they would connect over to it and do the work that they needed to do. Now, that is kind of a bottleneck model, right? And that's not a cloud operating model. What governance does for you is puts guardrails in place so you can actually allow your application teams to work at their own pace without having to put in requests and have bottlenecks in traditional IT. But they can't go out of bounds with the guardrails. Here's an example. Say you have a policy that says nobody in my company can deploy a virtual machine outside of a particular region. Okay. Now, how do you don't want your business units and your application development teams to deploy VMs, right? that are in a region that you have not agreed to or that you are not servicing in your IT department. So you can put a guardrail in place for that. You can say you can't deploy outside of a certain region. And so that's something that you don't have to follow up with or double check. That policy could be denied. I will deny anybody that tries to deploy. You could also do that with certain SKUs. Say you have very expensive SKUs that you don't want people to use for cost reasons. There are a lot of different policies out there, but like just giving you some examples, but like that's a very popular one too. Hey, we don't want anybody using these SKUs. They're very expensive. Maybe you have different environments, right? You've created your development environment and you only want to use certain SKUs that are fairly cost effective. All these policies and these guardrails you can write and put in place. And your center of excellence, this is what they do, right? They sit down and they discuss, these are the rules that we want to put in place. These are the policies that we want to write and enforce. Then you make sure you educate folks that are onboarding into Azure. They're doing their first migration project. Say, hey, when you migrate, it's got to be in this region. We have these set of policies and rules in place. And then you go ahead and you let them do their migrations, right? And you just make sure that they're, you either are auditing them with the policy or you're actually enforcing those policies with like a deny policy. There's 5 disciplines anyways that we look at. Cost management. That's a big one that your center of excellence team is absolutely going to focus on, right? Your security baseline. I talked about that in tip number 2, but you will find that your cloud center of excellence also, will do this as well on an ongoing basis, right? Resource consistency, right? Just again, making sure that backup is always enabled when you deploy a VM. That would be a resource consistency example. Your identity baseline. Making sure that you enforce the right, access control policies within your environment so people can't have access to things they shouldn't have, right? Your networking team, right, should have access, of course, any of the networking services that they need to do, but they maybe don't need access to, for example, SQL DBs. So you could control that with your identity baseline. And then deployment acceleration. Deployment acceleration, I would say there's 2 things that really help with that. One is standardizing on a set of infrastructure as code modules, like I shared with you with Azure Verified modules. Deployment acceleration could also be using more of landing zone accelerators, which I shared with you earlier as well, which will do a full end-to-end deployment, all written for you, following all of Microsoft's best practices. Spending time here will definitely accelerate your migration project and it will help you to be successful and you won't have surprises. Nobody likes surprises, especially when you get into, your leadership in any one of these companies. And doing this helps prevent surprises. You don't want a surprise on costs. You certainly don't want a surprise on security, right? And you don't want to find out later that you weren't backing up a system, right? This is so essential for your success in any migration project whatsoever. So again, I really look forward to you all following this. And again, I do have some links in the resources section to help you with this, but this will be a really good one for you to dive into as you go and have successful migrations into Azure. So let's jump over to tip number 6. So tip number 6 is essential. It's our resiliency tip, right? And resiliency is absolutely imperative for you to be successful in Azure. What I have seen is customers that have struggled with resiliency basically means that they've had an outage and it was an unplanned outage. And I will tell you, it is most likely their worst day for that person or that company that has experienced that outage if it was a mission critical workload. That means the business is stopped. You aren't able to access certain data that you may normally be able to access. You may have customers, you're losing sales, right? If it is something that's happening, say you have, you're in healthcare, it could be impacting the care of a patient. If it's, industry, it could be stopping the assembly lines, right? At a manufacturing facility. Resiliency is so very, very important. And when you do your migration projects back in the beginning, remember when I said you're going to be doing your discovery and your assessment and you're going to plan out your migration, right? You want to make sure that you are also planning for resiliency. You want to design for resiliency, okay? And if you haven't designed for resiliency, you need to assess what you've migrated or moved over to ensure that you are resilient before you cut over to production. Okay. There's a couple different ways folks do it, right? They could use like the Azure Migrate tool. They can migrate their workload. Then they can run a tool that I'm going to show you in just a minute. And they can see if there's anything else they need to be aware of to make sure that they're resilient. They can then, of course, address those recommendations. And then they can cut over to production. Okay. And the other thing I would say is you should periodically do this. Again, I talked about your center of excellence previously in the last tip. This should be part of your center of excellence too, is to make sure that you're regularly running resiliency assessments, at least on your mission critical workloads. The things that really would stop the business would be a bad press release for your company if something were to go wrong, right? Those are the things you want to regularly do this to stay resilient, stay compliant. Now, we have prepared for you. So like I said, some of these things are new for you. And one of the new things for you is the Azure Proactive Resiliency Library, or we call it APRL. And I've got the URL here, but again, I'll share it later for you. And what this is a curated set of recommendations for resiliency by Azure service. Okay. So if you think of your architecture for your workload, right? Your architecture is probably made of many Azure services that you're using and connected together to build your whatever your mission critical workload is. Each of those services may have more than one recommendation for it to make sure that it's resilient. And what we've done is we've curated a library of all of those recommendations for you. And we've organized it by service for you. And we have also, where possible, wrote automation to help you do a quick assessment of that. So first, you're going to have your Azure resources, okay? We also have done this with specialized workloads. So you can, again, think of like SAP, for example. So if you have SAP running, you can run it against your SAP system and see what comes out from the recommendations. We've aligned this to the well-architected framework. So this follows the well-architected resiliency recommendations, okay? And we provided tooling for you. The automation is built with Azure Resource Graph queries. So what it will do is when you run the automation, you will query against your mission critical workload, just the like the infrastructure components. We don't look at anything at the data layer. So not on the data plane, just on the control plane. And you'll get a report basically. You'll basically get an export and you'll get a report, and you can actually even generate like a PowerPoint presentation if you want. So you could take it to your leadership and say, hey, these are the things that are not resilient that we need to correct first. And we do organize it for you by impact. So if we feel that it has like, a very big blast radius, for example, express route service, if that were to like say go down, say it wasn't zonally redundant, and it would go down because you only had it in a single zone in a region, your express route gateway, we would flag that and say you should move this to be zonally redundant. And, it'll be highlighted as a high impact, because if that goes down, you've lost all connectivity basically to your on-prem resources, because your express route circuit, your express route gateway went down there. So that's just one example. This library is fully available to you. And again, like I said, I do have a link for it. And it's something new, but I highly recommend before you cut over to production on your migration project, you use this tool and just ensure that you've done everything you could to be resilient. Now, the last one is also a newer one, right? I'm going to share another new one for you. And this is going to be around establishing a monitoring baseline. Now, in the cloud adoption framework, I believe it was under manage. We actually did have some guidance around establishing the baseline for monitoring your workloads that you're migrating into Azure. But what I'm going to share with you is, a little more depth in a tool that we built to actually help you take that guidance and action that guidance. So first off, why do you want to do monitoring alerting? Of course, you need to detect issues as early as possible before they become an outage for your environment. You want to reduce your downtime, right? You also want to think about optimizing your utilization, right? You don't want to be paying for more than you're using. And being able to monitor these things will help you to understand what your resource utilization is. And you can make some adjustments, on your SKUs or on, maybe the number of instances that you have to help you to kind of optimize there. Compliance and security, of course, again, just like, you want to know if, for example, something suspicious is happening in your environment. For example, all of a sudden the CPU is spiked really high on a set of VMs, which was incredibly unusual. And you go and investigate and you find out a bad actor maybe has compromised that system and they did something on that machine that you didn't want. And the last thing, of course, is to do capacity planning, right? By understanding, what your utilization is, right? And doing your monitoring, it'll help you to estimate in the future, what you need and how to scale up. So monitoring and alerting is really important. It's also very difficult, right? A lot of folks aren't sure, well, what should the defaults be? What things should I be monitoring on each of these Azure services? There's a lot of Azure services that I'm using in my workload or my application. And I'm not sure which things I should be monitoring for and what would the threshold be, right? Like what should I know that should be something I should actually alert and that should help me to, I should cause action on. So what we've done is we have curated a baseline list of alerts. We call it Azure Monitor Baseline Alerts, or AMBA, okay, for short. And what it is, it's a curated list of services, okay? You can see that right now we have 67 Azure services. In those services, we actually have the recommended metrics and alerts and thresholds, right, that you should alert on for each one of those services. We also have provided templates and automation to help you implement those alerts in your environments. So we've got a full GitHub repo down below. I've got the link for you. And this has been widely adopted and fairly successful by our customers. So think about it. You've migrated to Azure, right? You've gone through, you've done your reliability assessment, right? Which is great. But before you cut over, right, you still need to get your alerting up, right? You need to at least have the basics, the baseline. This isn't going to monitor the application itself, but it will monitor all the services your application is built off of, right? You could think of this as a layered approach. So this is going to help you get all the services monitored for you. And we've also not only provided templates to help turn on the alerting for you, but we actually also provide with you in our marketplace a Grafana dashboard. So you can go and actually visualize, and because you may not want to turn alerting on everything, but you may want to look at what's happening maybe once a week, see what patterns are happening, helping you to maybe do capacity planning, something like that. And then you could go ahead and you can, decide, all right, now that I've looked at this for a little while, I know I'm going to set the threshold at this level, for example. So that's a very common thing that I see people do. So we do organize our resources, popular versus recommended. And what does that mean? Is when we work with our customers, we of course want to identify what's the things that what is proven to work for them, right? And we also wanted to know from a engineering perspective for each of the engineering product groups that develop these services in Azure, what do they recommend you turn on? So we have provided both sets of guidance for you so you can see what most customers do and what's been proven to work for them. And you can also see what engineering recommends as well, all right? So that should kind of help you. We've got templates we have ARM templates and bicep templates for this. And again, we have some different monitoring packs that we've developed just to help you, bundle up some of these alerts and things like that for certain scenarios that you're looking to do. For example, Azure Landing Zone has a scenario for AMBA. So, Azure Landing Zone, I believe, deploys 14 different Azure services as a part of the landing zone, that foundation. And of course, you got to monitor those things. Like, so say, for example, you deployed Azure Firewall as a part of Azure Landing Zone. You want to monitor the health of the firewall, right? To know if it's up, it's working, it's performing okay. So that's one of the examples that I would give you there. So this is an excellent tool for you. It may be new for you. Check it out. I think you'll be really excited and really pleased with what we've done here. All right. So as I said, To kind of wrap up a little bit is the best practices resources. I try to curate the list of everything you would need in a one-stop shop. So here's the list of the different links for each of the tips that I've gone through today for you. You'll see they're all kind of organized there by number. You can check them out. You can, move through the recording later if you want to find out, more and hear my overview of each one. All right. Now, one thing that you may be asking, well, how do I get some help? Like, you could be really new to this, and that's absolutely okay. That's fine. And I still have not migrated a single thing to Azure. Maybe you are really excited to get into AI, but you want to do this first as, we saw that as being a successful pattern with our customers. So what are your options, right? Like, how can you get help from Microsoft? We actually have 3 offerings to share with you. All right. First, we have the Azure Innovate offering. So think of this as, hey, I've got a really cool idea. There's something that I really want to build in Azure. It's going to be a net new workload or application for my company. And we want help. We've never done this before, but we really want help from Microsoft on doing this. It's going to be something that you're probably going to be native in Azure, meaning using the Azure services. And that's a great offering that we have for you called Azure Innovate. We also, of course, which is a flagship offering for us, is the Azure Migrate and Modernize. All right. So this is, again, if you're watching this presentation, this is most likely the one that you're most interested in today, right? Hey, I'm looking to do my first migration project. We're going to be moving something from my data center, right? And I need some help. Right? I've never done this before. I need a little bit of skilling. I would really love some expertise to review my plan maybe before we go ahead and do the migration itself. So you've got that as well at your fingertips, right? That Azure Migrate and Modernize. It's there to help you whether you want to do Windows, Linux, SQL, SAP, Oracle, whatever you're interested in, whatever your project you're looking to move, check that out. Microsoft is here to help you. The last one, and this is the newest one, so this may be new for you, is called Azure Essentials. So say you're a little further in your migration project, right? And you actually have migrated into Azure, okay? And maybe you haven't cut over yet. You haven't gone live yet. Maybe you have gone live. But you need some help because you want to make sure you've evaluated your workload to be reliable, secure, and optimized. Right. And you may say, hey, I've never actually done that before. I could really use some help with that. We have Azure Essentials. And I've got a link there for you, of course. And we've got a resource kit available for you. And that will help you to understand, with a Microsoft expert, if you're reliable, secure, performant, and that you're following best practices. We've got a lot of information, a ton of stuff there for you. I think you're going to be really pleased with what you find there. So depending on which one of these 3 makes the most sense for you, please, go ahead, use those links. Microsoft is here to help you be successful on your migration project. And with that said, thank you, everyone. I'm really pleased that you joined me today. And if you need anything, please follow those links that I shared before. Have a great day.